Hey everybody, my name is Derrick. I'm a part-time activist, double master's degree student. Nolan asked me to kind of fill in for him today, so we're just gonna introduce ourselves and get started.
Hey everybody, I'm Monica, and I am not in school anymore. I attended a few meetings ago, and I consider myself Afro-Native, and I work with both as a Black rights activist and Native rights activist, and I'm happy to be here to discuss this issue of colorism because it's real, and grateful to be in communication and interaction with other people that understand how this intersection is both needed, but how it happens naturally between some of us, how we're made. So good to be with y'all tonight.
Okay, I'm Anne Marie. I do a lot of Native issues. Right now I'm working on the protest when the Redskins play the Eagles game. And I am Lenape, and I'm also Italian, and you know, so I'm definitely mixed blood.
I'm Walelu. I am definitely mixed. I am Cherokee and Choctaw on my mother's side, and I am French, Mexican, Black, Dutch, and Irish on my father's side. So I get the intersectionality of being mixed, and the identity issues and white passing issues that come with that very, very well. I am an Indigenous activist. I'm currently in Massachusetts, but will be transitioning out to California to start my grad school work soon.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
I think that was everyone. So just to restate, our topic tonight is going to be on colorism, and it kind of dovetails from a conversation that we were having the last roundtable, where we had certain panelists describe how they don't always feel comfortable giving credence to certain heritage due to how they phenotypically express. I myself also have like several different admixtures. I'm a Louisiana Creole, and when I tell people that, one of the first responses I get is, "Oh, what? You're mixed?" People don't understand necessarily the difference between race and ethnicity. So I have to say, you know,
Okay.
there is
and color.
Yes. So there are Black Creoles and there are white Creoles, and I was fortunate enough I was born in Louisiana, so I've studied French since kindergarten. I really should be fluent by now, but I probably need a semester or two more of like advanced French, and I could probably call myself fluent. But when people see my mom, who is very, very fair-skinned, long hair, and she tells them there's no kind of like question, or no one doubts it, or there's no question. But because people kind of have an idea in their head about what a Creole person or what a mixed person looks like, there can be issues with me. Not really issues, because even, I don't know if you all experienced this, but particularly in the Black community, there was kind of like this phase where it wasn't really cool to say that you were anything other than Black, and that's kind of still going on. And that's kind of from a history of sometimes people who are maybe mixed race or maybe who are fair-skinned, maybe using their other ethnicity or other racialized identity to maybe get some kind of privilege or some kind of perceived privilege on some of other Black people's sides. So Creole has sometimes been something I've had to almost fight to identify as, because sometimes people look at you and they know who you are, or they feel that they know who you are. So I'd be interested in hearing about other experiences like that, or not like that.
I actually did a YouTube video a long time ago when there was a thing going around talking about the mixed girl tag. This was a few years ago, so I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago. And I did 3 videos because I needed that much time to actually break down all of the things involved in what it was for me being a mixed girl, but being raised with a Black ethnicity. So I was removed from my biological family, and I was raised by my adoptive parents who were Black. And so I didn't have any Native influence besides stereotyped, westernized perceptions of what it meant to be Native. So I embraced those because that's all I had. That's all I knew. And outside of that, though, I was very strongly encouraged to identify as Black because of my coloring. That's what I would be perceived as. I was taught societally. However, being that I was a lot fairer than my parents. My parents were very dark-skinned, and I was light-skinned with, with wavy hair, and it just clearly, something else. And so it was always difficult for me to do as my parents said and say, just identify as Black, just check the Black box, because I felt that, I did feel like, it was erasing the Native part of who I was. And as an adult now, I do identify as Afro-Native, and I say that with a lot of conflict only because I know that societally there's going to be feelings on both sides of those racial groups as to why I'm identifying that way. I'm doing it to claim something else besides being Black because that will make me more palatable for others. And the other perception is that, I'm definitely not going to be fully Native because I've been tainted with this Blackness. So, those are whenever I say that, I'm always like, oh, I'll get ready for whatever's going to come. But at the end of the day, I get out the pictures and I say, this is who you are and this is who these people were. And so I definitely make very clear, that I'm mixed race, that I'm bi-ethnic, and that I have my primary ethnicity is a Black ethnicity because that's how I was raised and socialized. Mm-hmm. So that's all I want to say about that.
Thank you so much about what you said there. Someone else?
I identify with that a lot, actually. I was raised with my mother's side of the family, and that was very fraught in and of itself because our Indigenous heritage was hidden. It was never kept from me that we were Indigenous, but it was not something that was celebrated. I was not raised knowing my tradition, knowing my heritage, knowing any of the culture, just knew what we were. I was still raised very assimilated into American culture, if you can call it that. And so people that met me either assumed that I was Hispanic, which I am on my father's side, or assumed that I'm white. And I always have this really shocked look across people's faces when I tell them, no, I'm Indigenous. And that in and of itself always just kind of sets my teeth on edge for people because being constantly mistaken for the very people that have been systematically oppressing you your entire life and for centuries gets really, really tired really, really quickly. So that needle in my identity has always been there. Just that assumption that either I speak Spanish, which I do not yet, which I wish I did, or that they automatically just assume that I'm white because I'm very, very pale. But it's not, the funny thing is that it's not even a pale that is the same tint as the majority of white people. So it's just a different shade. And it's not one that they stop to kind of differentiate between those who would be considered actually white and those who are not. So it's very irritating, and it really does ride that line. Could I sit back and say I don't get some type of privilege because I am automatically assumed to be white? No, I can't say that because I probably do. Do I automatically notice it because I identify as Native? I don't always notice it, but I can't say it's not there because people automatically project on me that I'm white. So it's got to be there somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anne?
Yeah. Well, I'm. I don't know. I've always kind of blended. I actually have 3 sisters, and they never thought that I was one of them. You know, they always thought I was like the friend. I was born with blonde hair, actually red hair, and then it changed blonde, and then my sisters all have dark hair. But, you know, so I don't look Italian. I don't look Native. You know, I do have some Native features, but, you know, I follow the Native culture. I just found that it's just a better fit for me. I've seen racism. It's not directed at me so much, you know, unless I'm in regalia. But I've seen it directed at my family. You know, people will say things to me thinking that I'm going to think their way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I hear a lot of really bad comments. You know, like I've heard comments like, you know, that dirty Indian, where they think I'm going to agree with them, and you know, they're saying that about my family. You know, you know, I remember one time somebody told my grandfather, you know, my grandfather was an Indian chief, and someone said to him, "What are you, some kind of hippie?"
I get that
you
one
know,
too.
and then when he said he was Native, then all the insults came out in that direction. You know, and it's just something, you know, I had to witness as a kid. And also, I went to a predominantly white school, so when I would tell people that my grandfather was a chief, I'd get laughed at. They, you know, because they thought I was lying. You know, so. You know, so then I ended up not telling, you know, friends in my school so much. I mean, people knew if they were my friends, but, you know, sometimes my friends would point it out, and, you know, I'd get made fun of for that. You know, so I really couldn't win either way. But I do know that I do experience some privilege, some white privilege. I'm always aware that when I'm driving, it's always people of color that are pulled over. You know, so, you know, I do experience that, but I associate with my Native culture.
Mm-hmm.
And your experience has kind of reminded me, I have a great aunt who was white passing, as we call it in the black community. She married my great uncle Robert, and I remember, well, I remember being a kid and being in church, and I think I must have just have learned like the word interracial, because I remember saying to them, "Oh, y'all are in an interracial relationship." And one thing about my aunt Abby is that she insisted that she was not a white lady. Like, she would stop you dead in your tracks and tell you she was not white. And so that's one of my first memories with her. But I also remember them telling me the story of when they were going to get married and the minister not wanting to do it because they were afraid that she was white and he was black, and so this was the time where that wasn't allowed. And so I kind of realized recently that I grew up with my definition of black being very wide. Like, I thought being black could be anything. So for a person to tell me that they're black and be, I mean, there's no particular skin tone or shade that I'm expecting.
Right.
But I didn't realize that there was so much ignorance around that fact, though, because sometimes a white passing person, as we would call them. I forget her name, but there was an article about her, and the comment section was full of black people saying that she wasn't black, and I had never experienced that before because I grew up seeing it, and then even my great grandfather was white passing or could have been white passing, so I didn't know that there were so many of our own people that were like ignorant of this history.
But that makes a lot of sense, though, because I do a lot of thinking about this because I feel like being forced into existing as a package and learning to exist in a society that forces you to be binary, either or. I realize that I have to always account for my own thinking with the difficulty in my own thinking of how I box people and categorize people so that I can figure out who's safe and who's not and how to approach them based on that. And so one thing I heard somebody say was, Ian, you said that white people will assume you're going to agree with them with stereotypes and racist comments because you share a skin color. And it's very similar, I find, too, that people may think that you are going to identify with them or identify with their beliefs or their belief systems and values because you share skin color. And that's really, really interesting because then it's something that kind of like connects you, but then at the same time you're like, we're not on the same page with that actually. Right. But back to like when we go back to the Willie Lynch laws and one-drop rules and things like that, I feel like black people, and this probably happened in Native communities too, but black people had to, they were forced into a mindset where, they had to know what being black meant. And being black meant, that 1 out of your 5 past ancestors, that 1/32nd blood quantum. If that's present in you, you absolutely could not try to risk using resources that you knew were off limits to you. So I feel like that mindset has come down and it's been a form of survival. And now that we've entered a period where we're starting to discuss both intersections, being multiracial and multi-ethnic means, we're realizing these binary boxes don't fit, but yet this is a social infrastructure of our society and stems from supremacy. So like when you said, to Derrick, I kind of, as soon as you said that, I was like, yeah, I get where that's coming from because that has been the survival mindset. So I'd be interested to know, because I wasn't raised with a Native ethnicity, is it similar regarding colorism in the Native world as well regarding, the whole, the color spectrum, and the darker you are, the more trustworthy you are as a Native, and the lighter you are, the more you're probably going to act more white, and be unsafe.
Yeah, I'd be interested about that as well.
And that might be a little easier for you to answer because I think you probably have more experience with that. I haven't had a lot of interaction with a lot of other Natives, unfortunately. The majority of my experience started with that on Twitter. And I haven't found a lot of issue around being able to approach other Natives with my skin tone. I've heard things, but I don't want to base that on things that I may have heard because I don't know whether or not they're true or appropriate.
Right. I can say... Go ahead, Ann.
I've actually even experienced problems at powwows where, I'm part of the Lenape culture and they think I'm a wannabe, until someone straightens them out and says, they'll say, she's the chief's granddaughter. And then they're like, but that makes me realize that there's other mixed people who don't have that connection to a chief, that experience. I mean, because of my grandfather, I was more accepted, but other mixed people don't have that acceptance. They're just like, oh, well, you're mixed. You're not a full blood. So I find that hurtful that people think that because you're mixed blood that you don't take part in the culture.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and a lot of these things that the fears and the stereotypes people have, a lot of them are rooted in some level of consistency. And by that, I mean, when people are removed from their culture and they are, like you said with ethnicity, so Derrick, their ethnicity is not a Native ethnicity, well, it's either going to be a white ethnicity or some other ethnicity, but it's going to be removed. And so they are not going to behave according to, you know, the ethnic values and traditions of whichever Native nation they may be assigned to and they may not fully identify with. And so with that, I feel like there's a lot of validity in Native folks questioning lighter skinned and passing folks, you know, and checking that. For me, it's always, let me show them by my actions where I'm at. You know what I'm saying? And so that's something that I just thought of, you know, when Ann was mentioning that, you know, there's validity in that, because there are people that claim ancestry in order to have a connection and to have some sort of validity to whatever stance they're taking, but then again, they completely abandon the ethnic values and traditions, and so they end up kind of disenfranchising still Native voices and marginalizing Native voices by using whitewashed behaviors that don't reflect who Native people are. So I get that.
One of the reasons that I haven't, I feel like most Black people, I have stories of Native ancestry in my family, and one of the reasons that I haven't looked that up fully is, A, we're still researching it. We know that the ancestry would have been either Cherokee or Choctaw. We know that there's a Choctaw reservation that's actually 2 hours south of where my grandparents live in Louisiana. So they've been asking questions about that. But in partnering with more Native people, I've taken a class taught by a very excellent Native professor. Her name was Professor Talbert. That class kind of changed my life. That's made me very, very cautious about wanting to, not necessarily wanting to claim it, but how you go about picking those traditions up or even learning about it. Because I feel like as a dark-skinned person, I feel like I might be perceived a certain way if I go about talking about that too much. And then I also feel that it might be better coming from my mom, because my mom has always been kind of called like these kind of terrible sexualized almost stereotypes, like red bone, yellow bone, and when people see her, the first thing that they ask about her is, you know, what she's mixed with. And people often don't even think that she's my mom. But because I've seen it typically expressed as this, I know that when most people look at me, they're going to see like a Black man. That's fine. I have no issues with that, and I don't want other Black people to feel that like there's anything wrong with being just another Black man. But at the same time, I don't want to abandon something that might have been taken from me against my will.
Okay.
And that I could actually have a genuine connection with if I took certain steps. So it's been kind of hard for me to navigate that.
Can you clarify what you mean when you say, as a darker skinned person, you know, like how you would approach uncovering that part of your identity or discussing that differently? I'm interested in what you're, you know, what you mean by that.
Just because there is a tendency for people to feel like they know what a mixed race person looks like, and so I've talked about it certain times with people before, and they'll go, "Are you sure?" Or you can kind of feel like the suspicion, like radiating off the person, right? And because you don't exactly know all of that history, like I don't have, you know, an enrollment number or anything like that. I don't want to be claiming something. That I might not have to, because I've been, you know, I know what the difference is between, you know, ancestry and being an enrolled member in a tribe today. And so I want to be delicate on that front. But then I've also found that, there's certain people feel like they know what a mixed race person looks like, and those conversations are very rarely as productive as you would like them to be.
And or respectful, but
right.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's just been finding who do I speak to about that, and I've been kind of pointed in some good directions, like the Mormon Church keeps a lot of records, and so my family is going through that. We have names, but it's just about what do you do once you have a name? Do you go to a reservation and speak to someone there?
Okay,
you call or like, because no one's ever, I've never had to ask about this as a Black person. Like, I've never had to, like, I mean, I was just Black, and I can talk to you at length about cultural artifacts and why we do this versus that. I can't do that. And even with being Creole, like, my family cooks all the crawfish etouffee and gumbo, and I speak French, so I feel like I can command that space. But this is something that I don't know as much about, so I don't know how to go about reclaiming that or looking at it.
Do you know how many generations back that connection is?
She would have been my grandfather's grandmother.
Okay.
Like 4.
Okay.
Yeah. But, like, I would just encourage you that if that is something that you at any time feel prepared to do or would like to undertake, just to, like, be encouraged in the fact that, you know, there are certain like I discovered there's like a national I don't want to say National Congress. I found it on Facebook, but it's either the National Congress of Black Indians that I found on Facebook, and I was like, oh my gosh, I finally found something that actually acknowledges the intersection of Black and Native people, you know, especially with Native folks owning slaves, you know, the 5 civilized tribes doing so. And so coming to grips with that history and acknowledging that, but then in addition, like, you know, my grandparents, my grandfather was a dark Black man from Texas, and my grandmother was, her family was on the reservation up at the Second Chippewa Reservation here in Michigan. So, you know, somehow they got together, and clearly that wasn't a relationship that had anything to do with 5 civilized tribes. So those interracial relationships are still happening and did happen, and it happened during that time period also when interracial relationships were not legal. And so on one document, my grandmother was listed as white, and on another document, she was listed as Negro. So, you know, it's like whatever they decided, you know, whoever was taking those. But I would just encourage you, you know, keep going down that path. On YouTube, there's some things about, you know, about Black Native Americans, how our experience is different because of racism. And in addition to that, and I would say, you know, like lateral oppression. But in addition to that, I had a journey with that, and I'd be happy to, like, talk with you about that sometime, of like the few years it took me to get where I am, to be able to say in my identity, no, this is who I am, this is where my family is from, here's my pictures, all the other elements of bringing that erasure, you know, into like the present, being like, no, this is what I represent. And so I'm happy to speak with you about that and just say, you know, I completely understand all of the socialized ways that we have to be, and or the socialized ways that we have to encounter and kind of cope with. But at the end of the day, to just encourage you, you know, to remember that above all of that just lies, you know, all those pieces of us or facets of who we are. And that matters, you know. It mattered before supremacy. It mattered before colonial, you know, settlers and all of that, or settler colonialism, excuse me, you know, and that still really matters. And if you want to go down that road, you know, and you feel that inside, then that's for you. So I just want to encourage you in that, if that's something that you want, you know, because I've known like other folks, Black folks that have Native ancestry, but they're like, I haven't even gone down that road because I'm still trying to cope with being Black. I completely get that. That's so valid. And having another ethnicity of being Creole as well. And then, you know, just all the layers of continually having to validate who you are because other people don't get it and they don't have your experience. It's exhausting. But, you know, every little bit you're ready to undertake, you know, there's a path, and if it's and it's for you. So whether you want to do that or whatever, it's for you. And, you know, you can find some type of connection, even if it's not able to go all the way back to where your family started, you know, with that. So that's kind of what I had to reconcile with. And from there, I began to build my way on the red road with that. So, but yeah, that would be a long conversation for another time, but I'd be happy to have that with you just to share.
Most definitely. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Let's set that up, please.
Okay.
I would just, Derrick, I would just throw in there, be very, very careful with any of your dealings with the Mormon Church. They like to falsify records. They like to keep people's records. I had a dealing with them a very long time ago, and they almost make you jump through legal hoops to get your records removed from their church. So be very careful with any dealings you end up looking into with them. And don't be surprised if the records are not accurate.
Well, some of my ancestors have had need to hide their ethnicity over time. Like I have a great-great-grandparent who is clearly mixed race, but is marked as colored, and they marked their first child as mulatto instead. But his wife is also listed as colored, so it's like if these two colored people are making a baby, how is it mulatto? So you know that they have need to like obfuscate who it exactly is who they are. And that's something, isn't it? To have ancestors who at various points of time during their life like couldn't say exactly who they are. And I've heard of other people having to deal with that as well. So
yeah, mine did it. My ancestors hid who they were just to make sure that they didn't get slaughtered for being Native. So I know
that's real. In addition to that, a really interesting quirk is when I was going through my family's records on Ancestry.com, I was looking at the census, and I read this it was very strange to me. This very strange addendum on the census where it basically was identifying how they were saying who was Native and who was not, and it was like, to me, another discombobulating form of erasure, because they were like, well, if you live on the reservation, then you're counted as being Native, but if a Native person goes and lives with non-Native families, then they're not counted as Native. So now they're excluded from the census as being Native, and they're labeled with the race ethnicity that whoever they're living in the household with is. But then let someone who's not Native come on the reservation and live with that household, and they're included as being Native. That whole calculation system to me is so part of the problem.
That is very interesting that you said that, because I had a woman reach out to me very recently. We did the ancestry test, a pretty extensive one, just to kind of figure out something about Africa. We know all the problems, but I had we know the problems with those things. I had a Native distant relative reach out to me, and we started talking, and she was telling me about a relative that she has that on the census is listed as Native as long as the relative is as long as the relative is living with one of her uncles. But once one of her uncles dies, because she found her later on the census listed as Black, and she was working as a maid. And so I was thinking about how interesting that is, that sometimes our ability to pass, or our ability to like claim a certain heritage seems to have like depended on someone else or being just what you said.
Honestly, all of that stems back into governmental violence and their need to place us all in a box that isn't white, and their need to place us all in this idea of being less than human. We're less than white, so we're less than human, so we're more categorical. But the entire idea of placing us into any kind of race or ethnic box is disgusting. The only way to prove Indigenous identity in this country is technically, from a governmental standpoint, to be actively enrolled in a Native nation, and that's basically akin to being due to a number. So that just strips humanity out of it. You're a number.
And that's one thing you mentioned to Derrick, something about like how you're not enrolled, and there's a difference between claiming ancestry and being enrolled. There is a difference between being a reservation, and I want to throw the word privilege in there, that there are certain levels of privilege to being a reservation Native person, and privilege to being an urban Native person. Like that they each have their own levels of privilege, but the privilege is within the group, so that people who are on the reservation have a sense of community and a sense of culture that we don't get. So that we're excluded from that, and that's part of the urban Indian movement to remove us from that. But then again, the reservations themselves were not positive representations of culture, because they placed us in poverty and removed us actually from resources that we needed. So to me, exactly. So it's like, at the end of the day, the whole on-res versus off-res, I completely scratched that. I'm like, that's a play of the government. At the end of the day, we were supposed to die off and bleed out of resources there. Those of us that are here in the city now, we don't qualify as Native because we don't have those cards and those numbers. So it's just this mind twist of a ploy to continue to decimate us using paper and numbers, like you said, less than human, dog tags, whatever. And at the end of the day, I'm like, no. So in reclaiming my identity, like I'm able to prove and to show that, you know, this is where my grandmother is from. This is where, you know, family lived and where my family owned land. And there's nothing I can take that away. But at the same time, the only reason I can do that is because they were connected to a federally recognized tribe. So that's the level of privilege I have, is that they were counted in numbers. And even though I'm not, I can say, oh, well, they were, and I can claim that as being, oh, this is where my family is from. So whether y'all like me or not, that's where I'm going to be.
Right.
It's so complex.
And for me,
well, now it's almost like, you know, the Native people are continuing the genocide on each other.
Yes.
You know, so they're disenrolling people. They're disenrolling people that have passed away. You know, I mean, to me, it's just horrible. You know, kicking people off the roll. But out here in New Jersey, the way we felt is that we always stayed on the land, you know, and other natives chose to leave or they decided to leave as a group. But, you know, we feel like we've always been here, and, you know, now we're at odds with the ones that have been removed. You know, it's just, it's the division, and it doesn't help. You know, I also know, like, with the Mascot issue, we have a lot of division. People forget that we're all fighting for the same thing. We're fighting for being recognized, and then not being recognized as Mascot. Allowing to have our own identity and not having our identity stolen and bastardized.
And caricatured.
So, you know, it's all problematic. But I just find it really sad that natives are doing it to other natives, and you know, they look at a lot of us on the East Coast. We're all, not all, but a lot of us are intermarried. You know, but if you marry somebody that isn't of the culture, they still become part of your family, and your kids are part of the family. You know, we've all attended powwows and gatherings together, and, you know, they really need to see that as genocide, and we all have different skin colors, but we all have the common culture between us. You know, and I'm not talking about, like, people that, the New Agers that pretend they're Native. I'm talking about people that have been Native, that have always recognized as Native. For years and years, you know, not just when it became cool to be Native.
Exactly. And I think that people who might want to, like the Rachel Dolezals of the world, I guess, I think that they can complicate people who do genuinely want to reach back out to an ancestry that they genuinely have, and kind of see how far that they can go with it. I couldn't believe I had to argue with certain people about whether or not she was a black person or not. But
it's not funny.
What are we been talking about right now?
What are we doing?
Right, what are we doing? And part of that, I guess, can be flattering that somebody wants to be you, or I don't know, is inspired by you, but I've never blamed Native tribes or people who identify as Native for being particular and about who they consider to be Native or not, or like for asking questions or anything like that. But I just want to say that there are those of us who might not look like stereotypically Native or might not look like that we have any particular heritage, but you cannot tell someone's race by looking at them. Like, you just can't.
Well, you really shouldn't anyway. Nobody should be making that assumption, period. And we're so many generations into mixing bloodlines that no one should be trying to make that assumption of anyone.
Right.
I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, like, I go back to the whole, like, biologically, we try to figure out who is safe based on our makeup. Right. So we can assume, based on the socialized history, that those who look similar to us or those that we can perceive to be like us are going to be the most safe, with those who look the most white being the least safe. So, like, for example, when you go into a crowd or you go into a space and you perceive yourself to be the only person of color by the only things you know how to identify, which is skin color or hair texture, that type of thing, you find, if you can find somebody that looks like you or that you know is also not white, you feel more comfortable. I know that's been my experience. I feel like, okay, I'm not, the only person that's going to be uncomfortable in here, because being in very white spaces is very uncomfortable and off-centering, for many folks of color, just because of the decorum that's expected. So I hear what you're saying with, we should not be judging people based on what we think they are or who we think they are, but I think part of that labeling and identifying also comes from a need to know is it safe for me to be myself ethnically and culturally around without feeling like I'm going to get some type of violence or some type of oppressive, treatment. And so for those of us who are darker, I think that's also a thing that we have to, with me, like being on like the darkness spectrum, I know I'm over here on like the high yellow part because that's what I've been told. But at the end of the day, it's like I also use my coloring, as a point of privilege when I speak out and say, well, as a woman of color, which you can't debate with me about because clearly I have, brown gold pigment to my skin. So I'm going to speak out on this issue and, have some validation to that. Where somebody who is white or passing, if they say woman of color, I even have to check my own thoughts and be like, you're not going to be seen the same way. You know what I'm saying? And it almost feels like scary to say I have trouble accepting whiter or fair or white passing people as using the label person of color because they're still not going to be treated like I am or like you are, So Derrick. So it's like, it's so complex. The labeling is so complex. And I feel like there's so many like, I don't want to say positive, but I guess I'll say beneficial things that can come out of understanding who someone is, but also so many negative missteps that can happen based on not knowing how a person wants to be identified or if a person wants to be identified as having kinship to you. So that's just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, I actually think that's an excellent point. One of my biggest regrets, because my great aunt, who was white passing, she passed away very recently of Alzheimer's, but one of my biggest regrets is that I do. Oh, thank you. One of my biggest regrets is not being able to ask her kind of what life was like as a person in those days to identify solely as black, but phenotypically expressing as something else. Because I've had instances when I tell people about her where they try to kind of like re-race her and say, oh, well, she was mixed. Well, yes, technically she was mixed, but she only ever identified with as black, and she married an identifiably black man and had identifiably black children. So I feel some type of way sometimes about people trying to go back after the fact and re-race her. Anyway.
No, I totally feel that. I have very fair passing children, and their father is white. And so one of the things I struggle with personally, being also a mixed race woman, but a woman, with skin that is brown, I realized that, did we lose someone? I realized that I struggled with that because my worst fear is that they will choose to not identify with me, or that someone will misidentify them and they won't correct them because it's easier for them to be identified as white. But however, one way that I feel more assured is that I feel like each of my children has characteristics that are able to be identified as non-white. Whether it's the eyes, it's the hair texture, or one of my sons has a little bit darker skin than the rest of the children. Those are little ways I feel that are sneaky that can identify them as not being completely white. I feel that when they're with me, that them being connected with me shows other people, okay, this is who they are because that's their mother. But when they're with their father and I'm not there, I feel like that whole part could completely be erased and not even acknowledged or identified. It's only when my son has recently been telling me instances of how he's being called white boy by darker skinned Black people at school, or my daughter said, somebody called her a white girl. It's when I hear these things and I ask them, well, how does that make you feel, or how did you react? And they always tell me, the first thing they say is, I'm not white, my mom is Black. And I always feel like validated in that. They see that, and they also feel so connected to me that they're like, no, that's not right. Something about that statement's not right. They're not like, oh, I'm so happy that you see me that way.
Right.
And so for me, that makes me feel like all of the social justice, anti-racist stuff that I preach and talk about at home, is like I don't have to like beat them over the head with it, that they're going to glean that just from being around me and going to the thing and participating in the things that I have them participate in culturally. But it is a thing of relief, because that is a fear of having your, symbolically also for Black women and for Native women, but having your children taken away from you by white people and white society and white culture, because they could fit that narrative if they wanted to.
Right.
That's all. That's a lot. I know I took like hell of space with that, but it's been something I've struggled with for years, and my oldest will be 10 soon, and I've been really grappling with that. So thank you for listening.
I think we have 5 more minutes. Any last comments?
Well, when I was younger, I had my elders tell me that there's natives come in all different shades.
Right.
So, I was kind of made aware of that, so I didn't have a problem, with someone being darker or lighter, or that's just how I was raised.
I had an experience with on my Facebook, I went to a concert by a tribe called Grad, and it was the first time I got to see them. They were in a town that was near me, so I went, and it was amazing to be in a space that I knew there were so many other Native people in. I'm like, I've never seen so many of us in one space, like in public, not at powwow. And it was like really something I felt finally more that I was a collective part of this group. And then I saw what I perceived to be a white girl walk in, and she had like 3 black stripes on her face. And I immediately was like thrown off guard, because I was like, okay, because this is a Native American group and there's a lot of Native folks here, nobody else has anything on their face or is dressed in any type of traditional regalia or anything like that. But I was really caught off guard and like just jarred, because this girl that I perceived to be white walks in with the face paint on. And I was like, how dare you walk in here and perpetuate that? Like, that's, and not at all like what this space is supposed to be. And so I made a Facebook post about it, and a very fair passing Native woman told me that I should not label anyone that looks white as white, even if I'm not sure, because they could be fair passing, because she herself has experienced being told that she's not Native or being labeled as white, and that had hurt her. And I understood that, and I said, well, do you feel, she's like, even though this person probably was white, you should be careful with who you call white. And I'm thinking, so as a person that, is clearly not able to be mislabeled as white, you know what I'm saying? It's like, we don't get the same opportunity to say, oh, well, I you know what I'm saying? It doesn't go the same way for darker people. And most of us are used to identifying, again, whiteness, and also not just by what it looks like, but how the behaviors are. So as soon as I saw the face paint, I was like, no. I was like, she looks like no one else here, and this is wrong. So I was upset by it. Yeah. But then I was also upset by this fair passing woman telling me that I don't have a right to, that I need to second guess how I label people, or how I address what was most probably, a facet of racism, red face, whatever. And I'm like, no, this is exactly what we need to be talking about. And what I want to know is why no one challenged her, why her friends allowed her to come in the space that way. And it's just like we always are accommodating this stuff, but then being told that we have to be careful because somebody could be Native. I'm like, I'd rather say it and be wrong and be like, and apologize, than just be like, oh, she's probably Native, let me let that pass.
Well, and it's not as though you were pointing it out because she was lighter skinned and she walked in with face paint. You were pointing it out because she was the only one to walk in with any kind of face paint on her face, and there's no reason for that in that space. She was clearly walking in and with some kind of disrespect on her face in a space where that was not needed, and it was clearly a stereotype, and it didn't need to happen.
She was probably doing it to try to fit in, but trying to fit in made her not fit in because everybody, looked at her like, "What are you doing?"
Exactly.
That's why I don't put on any, even like African regalia. Well, I have a few like African pieces, but those are things that I can talk about to a T. And I just feel, yeah.
Well, and
you know what, Pan-Africanism is
an appropriate place to wear that, and there's an appropriate time to bring that out. You don't just do that.
Which is why I felt like I could safely label that most likely as a white person, because that's something that white people often do, and it's not something like, oh, white people always be wearing face paint in inappropriate places. It's like, okay, that looks like a white thing that just happened, and somebody should say something because it's oppressive, and there's so many of us here, and that one instance of that person coming in and suddenly made it, to me, less safe, but also because no one said anything that I knew of, and I was like, why are we accommodating this in this space? And it's like so many people are like, oh, well, just ignore it, but that does bother me. I hate it.
No, I agree with you. I would have said something myself. And
so, like, do you need a makeup wipe or what's going on?
Right, I am pale and white passing, and I would have said something myself because there's no reason for that. What are you doing?
There was a very similar conversation.
Why would you do that?
Had around some people at Afropunk who had showed up with several of the face identification and like scarring. And it's just, I heard some African people talking about it, and they were just like, first of all, you should be careful about what you're putting on your face, because you're identifying yourself as a member of a certain tribe or of a certain subgroup, and it's, you never know who you might run into. And so if they have beef with that person, and you're just wearing something on your face that you don't know the meaning of, you might not have
inviting trouble.
Yeah. And although that's valid, again, that's black people with other black people. And that's a conversation that can be had, again, that's pointing to removal from the continent of Africa and how they're trying to reclaim that, even that indigenous identity. But when it comes to, like, white people, versus Native people, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's on a whole extra level of, like, actual racism at that point. But I see what you're saying, like, that Pan-Africanism it's a challenge and it's very complex, and I see our attempt to identify, and also with Africans see their attempt to like kind of dissociate, like, nope, we're not the same as you guys here in America. And it's sad. Again, it's all from the slave trade, from colonialism, and it's like, I feel like if we could just label that as that, I feel like we'd be so much better off than doing all of the arguing and the put downs and the critiques and the distancing, and say, I see where this is coming from, so now that we know that, let's move forward with how we're going to.
I love running into African people who think that I won't know anything about African culture just because I am African American, because then I get to talk to them about everything that I know about the cosmogram of the Congo, and like we just get to get into all these kind of conversations. I've kind of started labeling a lot of that Afro-diasporic culture, but that'll be kind of a conversation for next time. Or I want to thank everyone for tuning in. We'll be doing this, of course, next week. Any final thoughts from anybody?
Besides me, because I spoke like all the time.
No, we love it. We love it.
I just want to say, you could have said something to her. Like, what I normally do with that situation is I would just approach her and say, hey, what tribe are you from? What nation? And then when they don't know, then a lot of times I explain about the face paint. I'll tell them that we wear different colors to mean different things. A lot of times we paint our face with black if there's a death, or sometimes black could be war. And I try to use it, to educate, because people, they don't know, and they think they're flattering you, by trying to be part of you, but they don't realize. I think a lot of people are naive and they don't realize they're wrong, So
Approach is hard.
That's always been my approach, as opposed to getting mad or, you know.
Approach is so hard too, based on your experiences. So if you've constantly had experiences with people blowing you off, you know, you're like probably not going to be really nice about calling stuff out. So it's like people who appropriate are going to run into all kinds of approaches, and it's like I wish I could be less angry, but that's the phase that I'm in. And I wish I could be less pointed and say, you know, that's really offensive and it's not appropriate for that to be in this space. Would you like to talk about it? You know, it's like they're not going to want to talk to me.
Right.
I'm kind of beyond that because, I probably have like 10 years on you.
I hear you.
It's been there, done that, and I find that doesn't work, and I can't hold on to all that anger.
Yeah.
So I've mellowed out.
I hear you.
Well, everybody for tuning in and for offering their very, very insightful discussions. I can't wait to talk to everyone next week. We'll go ahead and sign off here, and see you all next time, all right?
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
See you guys. Bye, Mumpy. Hey, Derrick.
What is who I am, and then what is the presentation going to be about? How would it, have everybody responded to the emails, have you seen the emails that, of the materials that I sent you? Okay. Okay, I can do that. No, I could put the group too. That's cool. Together we stand. That's the group name.